Hello there, and a huge welcome to this week's episode of Gina Gardiner and Friends. And today I'm joined by Elinor Stultz. She's an international best-selling author, a natural-born salesperson, and she is a breaker of barriers. Elinor, a huge welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today.
It's an honor to be your guest. Thank you, Gina.
We're going to be talking about the theme of experiences that we have, the worst experiences that we have. Gifts in disguise. Believe, become, and empower. And I'd like, if you would, to set us off by telling us a bit of your story and how worst experiences can become best, because I'm sure there are many people out there experiencing what they think are really challenging circumstances at the moment.
Yeah, we each think that we're the target. Nobody else experiences what we do, but that's really not true, is it?
No, not at all.
So my experience in the corporate world was that I'm a stupid female, silly to train her. And I thought, well, I've never sold before. I don't know what the big equipment is all about, but it's a green light to go have fun with my prospective clientele. And, they fire me, they can pay me unemployment. That was my thought. I'll show them. But you know how I showed them? Instead of selling, because I didn't know what it was all about, I made friends with everybody I encountered. My nickname became a breath of fresh air. And they all purchased from me. And by the fourth month, not knowing a thing about what I was supposed to be doing, I became the top producer of the first firm with which I was working. And then the games got really nasty. So my advice is just take what's hurled at you, do the best you can, because underneath all the ugliness, many, many lessons are going to come out. And if you heed those lessons, you are going to perform far better than you ever thought possible.
You know, it's interesting, isn't it, how often we meet a barrier. I can remember when I went to apply to be a deputy principal or deputy head in a school. The school I ended up being the principal of for 20 years. I was told, we don't want you, we want a man. It was 1984, and they could say those sort of things then. And you either curl up and say, okay, then I'm going to go away, or you take action. And what strikes me is that your action was pretty profound in the sense that you intuitively recognized that creating relationships was the most important thing to do.
Well, I think my sales behavior was due to my childhood. My mother kept telling me over and over again, be nice to whoever you meet, no matter what. And my dad said, you just never, ever give up. You find a way around and do it. So between the two, it was the perfect formula for succeeding in business.
I would say it's the perfect formula for succeeding in life, actually.
Yes, it is.
I mean, I often say on this show that, we're the common denominator. We take ourselves wherever we go, and we're very likely to behave in one situation as we do in another. So you are successful, and as soon as you start to be really successful and prove all of the naysayers wrong, you started to experience, I think the word you used was ugliness.
Oh, yes. How would you feel, or anyone feel, if in honor of their numbers being the top producer, a lingerie fashion show was provided at a motel on the wrong side of town for the men? What would you do? What would Elinor do?
So come on, tell us what Elinor did.
My car, I didn't know what to do. My husband said, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. So my car drove me to the motel, mother-daughter combo, really questionable outfits. And surprisingly, there was a big buffet table, and the very end seat was vacant. So I sat down there. And one guy next to me said, I bet you don't wear outfits like that. So I looked at him, I said, I'll be happy to answer that. But first tell me, do you wear tops, bottoms, or nothing at all? And stop the nonsense, I began very loudly asking copier questions about how the copiers worked. And I did it specifically to the director of sales, who was sitting at the opposite end of the table. And I would not let them enjoy the event. Toward the end, the mother-daughter team said, you can come see our outfits if you have more questions in our motel room. So the last question was to the director, are you going to go visit their motel room to see what else they have to offer? And he turned me red. By the time we all got back to the office, he swore he would never do anything like that again.
Well, you know, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Can I just get a sense of what year we're talking about, what time frame we're talking about?
Yeah, in the early 80s, I believe.
Okay, so my next question to you is, do you think things have changed much?
No, not at all. And I'll give you a very good example why. I was stunned. I mean, all the stuff that took place in the sales arena, my friends told me I had no business in sales and that I was acting inappropriately. I mean, I really didn't have any friends where I previously lived. So, but there was nothing else to do. Anyways, we moved to a new city. I had been very successful in Silicon Valley. I became a sales trainer. Everybody loved the training. We moved, and it was the last thing people wanted to know, that a female knew how to train. And they laughed me off a stage when I was introducing myself. And someone came over to me and said, to establish credibility, you have to write a book. So here's what happened with all that ugliness. I wrote a manuscript. It broke all records. The first publisher picked it up. It was quickly featured in Time magazine and became an international bestseller, and is now evergreen among the classics. Why? Because nothing has changed. Women globally are still experiencing the same, and it still goes on where I'm living, and no doubt where you're living too.
One of the things that strikes me is how often we, as individuals, are put in boxes by other individuals, whether because you're a woman, or because you are of a particular race, or because you are a particular age group, that there are many people who are ready to limit you simply because you don't fit their particular blueprint.
Exactly.
And when we come back after the break, we're going to go for a short break now. I'd like to unpick with you how, whoever you are, if you are faced with other people's blocks, other people's boxes, the best way to approach that. And you've got chutzpah, you've got so much energy. I get a sense that, you know, you're a bit like a bottle of pop that's been shaken, that you're never going to be put back into the bottle. But there'll be many of our listeners who have been told that they're not suitable, they're no good. And I think what would be really helpful is if we can explore approaches to help those people feel more empowered, so that when they are met with those barriers, that they can hurdle over them just as you have done. I know you came from parents who told you to always be kind and to never give up. And that, as a combination, together with your personality, has meant that any barriers that have arrived, that you have overcome them. But if people are facing barriers, as I'm sure they are, and they don't have your confidence, and perhaps haven't had the blessings of parents who gave you those values to live by, what for you would be the things that you would say to those people who are being made to feel that they have to play small?
Well, what helped me was I was scared to death to do sales, and especially with the treatment in the office and not knowing how to sell officially. I enrolled in a public speaking class, and it made all the difference in the world. Initially, I thought they were laughing at me because I was so dumb for putting up with everything, but it turned out they were laughing at all the stories I shared, and I became the grand prize winner at the end. Surprised me. But the point is, wherever you feel you are lacking, research on Google, enroll in a class, no matter the style or the type, but get the education, do the research that you need. Next, it's a very important sales lesson. To stop talking, listen, and anything that doesn't sound correct or there's a disconnect, ask one word question, why? Then expand it to what has been your experience so I understand where you're coming from. Let the other person do most of the talking, and you will think of other questions. And by the time you have everything answered, you'll be able to connect the dots to where they are, to where you are, try to negotiate something in the middle to find a solution to move forward together. It's not always 100%, and lots of times you think, oh, that person's nuts. Walk away. Don't waste your time. But when you find people who are willing to have an in-depth conversation, there's more possibility and opportunity awaiting.
I think that's incredibly great advice. And actually, for those of you that are listening, recognizing that, take one small step forward and do something consistently over time. Those 3 things that you've offered people, that do your research, get some training, ask questions, and prepare to listen actively, I think are incredibly powerful lessons for pretty well every situation. The thing I would add to that is recognize that your comfort zone is only a familiarity zone. It's only what you know. And that if you step out of your comfort zone and you feel fearful, but you do it anyway, that comfort zone expands. And one of the things that strikes me about your story is that you've never let your comfort zone stop you. You've used it as a springboard to move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, another lesson early in childhood was if you don't speak up for yourself, no one else will.
No.
Take the opportunity.
Lots of people who may be listening to this may think, well, it's all right for you. You're a best-selling author, that you've managed it, but I can't. What for you do you think makes the difference between those people who see themselves as a victim to circumstances, and so their prophecy that they can't becomes self-fulfilling, and those who think, I'm frightened, I don't quite know what I'm doing, but I'm going to go forward, and they succeed? What is it? What's that core that makes the difference?
Well, admittedly, I never fit in. I was always alone, and I used to talk into the mirror, and I would explore perspectives of both sides because I was always on the opposite side. So I'd have these conversations in my head and in the mirror, which helped with body posture and facial expressions, weighing pros and cons, and that certainly helps in business. And I also had to learn how to deal with bullies. By age 5, I knew how to deal with them. And it was like, watch out, because I know what I'm doing.
Now, that for many people, I think, is quite an interesting concept, because many people feel as if they are the victims of being bullied. So it's a very early lesson. What are the learnings that you would offer other people who are listening about not giving in to being bullied?
Okay, well, one thing I'd like to point out, the people who are most egotistical, the bullies, they are that way because, in my opinion, they don't know as much as we do. So it's the only way they can feel important. The people who know they're important and have something to offer other people are the ones who are more quiet and seek out ways to lead and help communities. And I feel that's far more important. And so when a bully says something to you or threatens you, again, stand your ground with those questions and put them on their guard.
I think we live in a world where many people think that to step into their power means that they have to have dominion over others. I absolutely agree that bullies, and whether we're talking about in the playground, in my experience in schools, or whether you're talking about in business or in life in general, in my experience, people who are unkind, nasty, bullish, usually don't feel very good about themselves. They lack self-confidence. And they bluster and they exaggerate and they need to be seen to be right. And I often think that, they might win the argument, but they lose the war, because that need to be seen to be right means that they have to make other people wrong. And there's no way then forward in terms of finding a positive way forward that actually works for both parties.
Exactly. And again, going back to the questioning, it puts them on their heels and then you can move forward.
One of the things that you wrote to me before the show is that my broken neck is my all-time best gift in disguise. Now, for many people, a broken neck would be anything but a gift. Please explain.
Okay. Yes. Once upon a time, it was a little over 20 years ago. I was at a red light. I finally took a day off after 11 years of the nasty corporate sales world. And I'm at a red light, about to make a left turn, and somebody's not paying attention and rear ends me at about 60 miles per hour.
Wow.
And I told the doctor I could feel my brain swaying in my head. Of course, he didn't believe me, but nevertheless, I was in pain for 10 years. I say, thankfully, I was a passenger in a car on a rainy night when it made a left turn and skidded into a lamppost. And I timidly said, you better call an ambulance. So there I was in the hospital, and one of those rare people had a near-death experience. I was on a stretcher waiting for admission. I heard my family being consulted and all of a sudden breaking out into sobs. But at the same time, I had two visions come to me. The first was of me becoming a speaker. And in my mind, I said, yes, that's what I always wanted to be. I saw a blink of a light, which gave me, positive feeling, and a gorgeous gold light encased my entire body. And then a second vision appeared, and it was completely embarrassing. It was in the form of my life report card. I had high life marks, but on the right-hand side, it was entitled Community Service, and the page was completely blank. In that second, I said to myself in the great beyond, I will begin giving back to communities any way I may, but I'm also a salesperson. And I added, but to give my best, I have to be able to walk out of this hospital on my own. Again, I saw a blink of a light. I knew that was my okay. And slowly but surely, that gorgeous light dissipated over my body. And then my family came over in tears. And I said, go home, get a good night's sleep. I'm going to be fine. Of course, they must have thought I was delirious. The next morning, all kinds of miracles happened that night. And I'm not one who previously believed in miracles, but you don't have time for all of this. So the next morning, I'm heavily medicated, and the doctor says to me, Mrs. Stultz, when you wake up, most likely you will be paralyzed. And being a salesperson, I knew most likely meant he didn't expect me to survive. Given what happened the night before, I used a sales technique mirroring some of his words. I said, doctor, when I wake up, I fully expect to be well. And he jumped backwards before cutting me open. Anyways, hours later, he's standing over me. He said, there's no rhyme or reason for what happened, but in 4 days, you will walk out of this hospital on your own. And so I say sales skills saved my life.
Amazing. I think so often we hear words and they become our reality. I was told I wouldn't walk again after my skiing accident, and I was blooming determined I was going to. It took me a long time. I didn't have the miracle that you did, but ultimately I now walk. And I think, we were talking before the show about how for you, having those visions and having that realization that your life's work was going to be something different, but incorporating your skills. For me, it was developing an approach to leadership, which I don't think I would have done had I been fully able to get into, physically able to get into the classrooms. And so for both of us, in a very different way, you know, the universe had a very different message and direction for us to take. But I'm conscious of time, and I'd like you to tell people about both your books and where they can find you.
Okay, so I started to mention when we moved to a new city, everybody laughed me off the stage with terrible ridicule. I couldn't possibly know enough to be a trainer. Someone said to establish credibility, write a book. So all those awful corporate stories over 11 years came to mind, one after another. I put them down on the pages with all names changed to protect the guilty. And the first publishing house said yes. It broke all records. Why? Because women around the world were having similar issues, and some of the men too. And it became well recognized and featured in a number of magazines. Now, the second book, and I meant to say, Nice Girls Do Get the Sale, Relationship Building That Gets Results. It's evergreen among the classics. I never expected that to happen either. It's just results that are far beyond my imagination. Hired was written because people were saying they couldn't get a job. It was after 2008 when the market fell badly in the States. And so I have a knack for getting hired. 11 jobs, 11 years. I knew how to sell myself. So I wrote the book. And one of my fond memories was a story about being asked, if you were any animal, which would you rather be? I thought, what does that have to do with a job? But I answered the question nevertheless. And I said, oh, that's easy. I would be a zebra in the desert, because I was in Africa, and when it ran on the plain, it was so graceful. Oh, excuse me, not a zebra. I would be a giraffe. As it ran on the plain, the fur shined and it glowed. And the other thing is about salespeople is you always complain that they pick low-hanging fruit. Well,
a giraffe.
A giraffe, thank you, has a tall neck and can get the highest fruit off the tree. And that's me. I don't let any obstacles stand in the way. I got hired immediately. So with the stories included, like Nice Girls, I wrote Hired, How to Sell Yourself on Interviews.
Where can people get hold of you?
My website, smoothsale, SALE.net, and Smooth Sale refers to building and returning and referring clientele. And my books are on Amazon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining me. It has been an honor, thank you, Elinor, to talk to you and to hear your story. And please do join me in the next show.